All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another panel discussion. This time, we are talking about healing from hate. In our last panel discussion, we reflected, we lamented about the rise in anti Asian hate crimes the last year, and we shared our personal experiences, and it was a uh, very emotional discussion, and we wanted to make sure that we followed up that panel discussion with some concrete steps and what we can do to be part of the process of healing, because it's so easy to get trapped in the whole getting angry, and of course there's room and there's space for that. But as Christians, as people that love Jesus and seek to love others, I believe that we can find a better way. So having said that, again, welcome to those of you that are catching us live or catching us later on uh, in uh, in the stream. I want to welcome my panelists here this evening. I want to welcome Sam and Esther, Samantha, and Jeremy. Welcome back. Glad you guys could join me again for this panel discussion. I'm going to let you guys reintroduce yourselves later on, especially since we're going to be celebrating a little bit about our cultural heritage. So before we begin, of course, we want to make sure that we start off with prayer. So let's say prayer together. Dear Lord, I want to thank you again for this opportunity to just come together in our panel discussion. I'm grateful for each panelist that has taken the time, Lord, to sit and pray and reflect on our discussion this evening. And we pray for those that are going to be joining us this evening, whether they're really interested or they're just curious and just passing by, Lord. We pray that our discussion tonight will honor you, will be constructive in ways that we can take the steps that we take, Lord, to be part of healing from hate. So, Lord, we give it all to you this evening in Jesus' name. Amen. So, as you all know, this is AAPI Heritage Month. And for those of you that don't know what AAPI means, it's Asian American Pacific Islander. And so we want to start off a little bit on a light note, celebration. So, for my panelists, go ahead and reintroduce yourself. Tell us what your background is, and also tell us, what's your favorite food from your cultural heritage, and what's one um, principle or trait or something about your culture that you really, really love and has really impacted you. So let's start with you, Samantha. Go ahead and let us know about you.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I am a proud Filipina. Woo!
Mm.
I've got my flag out to represent. And then one of my favorite foods, oh, that's tough. I would have to say my grandma's, it's called chicken tinola. It's basically like chicken, vegetables in this soup. And when you mix it with white rice, oh my gosh, it's to die for. I can eat like 7 bowls of that. And then one of the things that I appreciate from my culture, I'm trying to think how you say it in English, but it's basically whenever you see an elderly person, you go up to them, you take their hand, and you put their hand to your forehead to symbolize
Mm.
respect. And I think that's just so cool because it's showing that you, as a young person, you in a different generation, can still show respect to those that have come before you. So I think that's pretty cool.
Awesome. And what you're referring to, Samantha, so I'm Filipino too, so I might as well just throw that out there while we're on this same train. It's called manopo.
Oh yeah, that's
Basically,
right, Manapal.
yeah, it's a symbol of respect for our elders. Um, but you know what? Let's go to somebody else. Sam, the other Sam. Tell us about yourself, man.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam, as John mentioned. I'm Indian. My parents came from India in the mid 80s, late 80s, sometime around that time frame. So I was born here. Um, Favorite food? This is always tough. Definitely rice, white rice. I just want to clarify that. Um, Growing up, comfort food was basmati rice with dal, which is like a yellow split pea soup. and yellow potatoes. So lots of turmeric, lots of oil, everything a kid could ever want. Um, Cultural quality that I appreciate. Man, this is hard because I don't feel like it's just specific to Indians, but I think one thing I admired at least about seeing, other Indians in the United States is just the boldness and the bravery of like going to a new place and and setting down roots, even if you don't know anyone, even if you don't really have a community, but you've got a family and that's your priority. So I think that emphasis and essence of family was pretty cool, at least from a work ethic perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam, for sharing. Esther, talk to us.
Hi guys, I'm Esther and I am a very proud Korean. I don't have my flag here, but I will say my favorite food, as everyone mentioned, is very hard. So everything Korean food is just generally like the utmost like favorite, but I will say my comfort food is also white rice with kimchi. Like any given day, I can come home and eat a bowl of white rice and kimchi and just be perfectly content. And with that being said, a cultural quality that I admire, and it's not just specific to Koreans, but I feel like generally any immigrant story is just how rooted we are with our family and just the togetherness, and especially togetherness around food. So one of the my favorite memories and traditions I would say that we still continue is that my mom and I try our best, but we make kimchi from scratch every winter, and it's not a practice that's carried on very often anymore, just because it's so time consuming and it's really labor intensive, and so. That's just one of the things I really enjoy as a Korean, and also just kind of practicing that, just the method of making kimchi, just a reminder of how hard it was in the past, and just like the act of like preserving food, and just being able to do that with my mom is definitely a favorite of mine, for sure.
Yeah, I actually, if you follow Esther on Instagram, it's totally shouting out her Instagram, but she would put in her story the process of making kimchi, and like
2 years
how
saved on my highlights. Shameless
yeah,
plug.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thanks, John.
I got through a quarter of that and I got tired and I wasn't even there. I was like, if this is what it takes to make kimchi, then God bless you and your
It's so
ancestors.
worth it, though. I mean, shout out to my mom. She does more of the work. I mean, there's a reason why I hide behind the camera. But no, yeah. If you check out my Instagram, then yes, I've saved 2 years worth of the process in my highlights. So that's all the plug I'm gonna do.
Wow. I do like kimchi too. Jeremy, talk to us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name is Jeremy. I am proudly Chinese as my heritage. And my favorite Chinese food has to be my mom's wontons, her homemade wontons. So she made a vegetarian version of the wontons, and they are to die for. That would definitely be my favorite food. Is my mom's wontons. Um, so what's the second question? Oh yeah, heritage. Sorry. Yes,
So you got distracted by the food. I get it.
I got distracted by the food, man. I'm just thinking about my mom's wontons. Um, so uh, something that that again, I don't think it's unique to Chinese, but just the importance of working hard and the importance of education. Um, I think that's very important. I wouldn't be where I am today without my parents instilling in me the importance of a good work ethic, working hard for what you want, and the importance of education. Um, I know that a lot of people hear horror stories of Asians in school and education and things like that. But I am fortunate and very happy with my parents and instilling me the importance to learn, and the importance to grow, and the importance to work hard. Because like I said, I wouldn't be where I am today unless I had those principles instilled into me when I was young.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So I already shared, I'm Filipino, and if this is an unfair question about food because like I love all kinds of food, and I don't want to be that person that dodges the question, so I'm not gonna dodge the question. But I will say this that my one of my favorite foods, Filipino dishes, definitely has to be kare kare. It's you can Google it. I don't want to really describe it in length, but it's a really good dish, and I
How
love
do
it.
you spell it?
It's Kare and I love eating it with rice. So that's one of my favorite foods. Um, so there's that, and I think for me, having grown up in a Filipino household, even though we grew up in the States, I'm pretty sure, just like the rest of the panelists, I was very much influenced by my parents' culture. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the willingness to sacrifice for your family,
Mm,
holding your family in such value that you are willing to sacrifice your time, um, your energy, your life, even your comforts, so that your family can flourish, and especially your children. And one of the things that I remember growing up, seeing my parents working so hard, even though they had um, struggles with the language and with culture. Even they put on their hard hats and they worked hard. And mom and dad, if you're watching right now, thank you so much for all the hard work that you put in. You never complained. You just did what you needed to do. So thank you for instilling that in me, and I certainly hope that I can also, um, if I ever have my own family one day, I hope that I also pass on those same values to them as well. So as you can all see, those of you that are watching us, Asians, I mean, generally speaking, we have commonalities, but we're all very unique and different in our own cultures. And so something that we need to say up front here is that every one of us, every we come from different cultures. There's many Asian cultures. So when we talk about Asian Pacific Islander, we're saying broadly. We can't speak to the experience of others. We can simply share our own. So thank you all for sharing. So let's get into the panel discussion questions. The first question that we really want to tackle is kind of following up with our last panel discussion, which was how have things been since our last discussion? What are the kind of conversations that you've had before or since our last panel discussion? Good, bad, challenging. Uh, Anyone want to share an experience?
I can go.
Yeah,
Oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Sam. Go ahead, Sam.
One of the Sams
Sorry.
go.
Okay, I'll share mine first. I would say it's a pretty positive response. I've had some of the young people at my church actually reach out to me and say a really good thank you for us to provide that open space, to have that discussion, to provide that safe zone to know that whatever struggles that us as Asians are going through, we're not alone. And it's nice to have that community. So it was a good response from some of the young people at my church, and they really appreciated it. So I'm glad that we were able to do it.
Yeah, wonderful. Sam, the other Sam.
Good.
What about you,
I
man?
was going to say, I've had good positive responses. I've only had a few conversations, but generally it's been encouraging to know that you have allies out there, even if you may not realize that in the heat of a moment, for example. So So it has been encouraging. It is still a little depressing to see this still continue to be an issue. Um, but I'm grateful for the support that's out there. So
Awesome. Esther, Jeremy, what about you guys?
Yeah,
Good.
so I'll go ahead and share. So sorry, Esther,
No, you're
didn't mean to
okay.
cut you off. I'll go ahead and share. Yeah, at least in my experience, follow up, really good conversations, a lot of support. Um, I knew that I heard that my in-laws were watching, a couple members of my family, um, and just talking about it. Um, I remember specifically there was one time. This was pretty recent or this was recently after the shootings in Atlanta. Um, I was in the middle of our pastoral staff meeting, our weekly staff meeting, and just able to talk and share openly with the other pastors about just how I was feeling and things like that. Um, was good, and the overwhelming support that I received um, from the majority of people was definitely very comforting.
Good,
Um,
good. Esther?
So, yes, I've also had generally positive feedback as well. But I will say I've had a few challenging moments, not because anyone was negative to me, but I think I wasn't prepared for the level of vulnerability that I had to experience.
Mm,
And that was a challenge in itself. Like, it was very revealing, and there were a few misunderstandings that I had to kind of fix, and that led to some challenging conversations, but the overall response and the kind of the resolution we were able to get to was good. But with that, I will say, I'm sure we'll get into this in a later time, but I will say just the time we had our last panel till now, like the struggle I've had to re-examine my own faith has been real. like almost flipped upside down, kind of reevaluating what I believe in and kind of the direction I need to take this in the future. So, but we can discuss that at a later time. But overall, it was a very positive experience.
Okay. I'm glad that you all have had a generally positive experience. I've had a mixture of both. I think that I would say overwhelmingly I've had a positive response and I've had very good conversations to where people actually intentionally reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd like to hear your story. Can we sit down together? Can we meet and I'll you talk, I'll listen." And that probably was one of the best experiences that I've had where people actually reached out and said, "Hey, I want to hear your story." And like you, Jeremy, like I've had colleagues reach out and say, "Hey, I support you, I love you," um, and even within those friendship conversations and even colleague conversations, there's a great deal of they don't know a lot of things they're just ignorant of, or like I didn't know that this was offensive, or how can I talk to you in a way that doesn't offend you. And I think those are very positive conversations where it's they were intentional about, like, when I ask you where you're from, I hope you don't mean that I'm saying like you don't belong here. And I explained the history behind that phrase really is because we don't look like we're from around here. And of course, you don't mean it as offensive. But if you take it from my perspective, I get hit with that a lot. And I realize I'm currently pastoring in Kentucky, and I think the Asian population in this state is 0.01%. So it's very unlikely that you're going to encounter somebody that looks like me. So I get it. Like you don't. I'm not from around here, so I understand where that
mm,
comes from. But I said, I get that, but probably a better way to navigate that question instead would probably be, instead of where are you from, ask if you're interested in where my what my ethnicity is. Just ask, hey, what's your ethnic background, or where's your hometown? Probably better questions, because the way that we phrase these things does speak to two things that what I've realized, that I think that all Asian Americans, all foreigners really could really identify with. But I think specifically for Asian Americans, we struggle with two things. One, the perpetual foreigner, which is no matter if you've grown up here or you've immigrated here at a young age and you've assimilated into the culture, you speak English really well, you basically you're American. You're still seen as someone that's not from around here. So that's one, the perpetual foreigner. And the second is that model minority. Um, when people say, "Oh, you should be good at math because you're Asian," I mean, that's like a positive and a not positive thing. It's just like, so on one hand, you're complimenting me that, because of my ethnicity, I should
Mm,
be good at math. But at the same time, what you're also saying is that if I'm not good at math, then I'm not a good Asian.
mm,
So navigating those kind of conversations around those two things that we all struggle with as Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, is helpful. Letting them know, and I think engaging in those discussions have had clarifying and help other people that are not Asian American understand and better navigate conversations. But on the other hand, like some of the more challenging conversations came from actually other Asians, believe it or not.
mm,
And this kind of was a wake up call to me personally, because um, I mean, I know that we don't all have the same experience and nobody shares the same perspective. We can talk in generalities, but not everybody sees it the same way. I've had some Asian Americans reach out to me and say, I don't see racism in this country, and I have experienced racism, and talking about racism perpetuates racism, and how it's not really constructive to be talking about you know racism. And so I understand and I respect where they're coming from. I disagree with them, of course, but I think just having those conversations have been helpful for me as I've kind of journeyed in my own with this reality of you know being here but not necessarily feeling like I belong. So yeah, so I think I spoke a lot there, but I don't know. Did you guys, none of you had any of like more challenging conversations alongside those very flowery, positive stuff that you've gone through, or is it just me?
I think for me, the conversations I've had in and of themselves weren't challenging. They came from places of support. The actual discussion was solid and good and encouraging. I think what was challenging about having that discussion was kind of the implications of having that discussion. So what I mean by that is, you know, I briefly mentioned this earlier, but I'm talking to someone and you know we share similar mindsets as far as value of life, regardless of heritage and whatnot, and so on and so forth. But then the challenging part of that conversation is we seem to get it. Why don't other people get it? Or why
yeah,
is this still a thing? Sometimes it feels like, whether you're Asian or black or, any other, oppressed group, you have to justify your existence and the value of your life in a country that, values life,
mm,
at least at I guess from a very early age. So I think the disconnect there is what's really challenging and jarring. Why do we have to say that we have a right to live? Please don't hurt us for walking down the street or for working hard or doing something. Like I think that's the part that's been really challenging, just the implications of even having a conversation like that. And then just like what seems to be a inconsistency in values, right?
Hmm.
Why do we value life at certain stages of life and not others? Or, why does it seem to be inconsistently applied? So that's where I'd say the challenge for me has been coming in. I don't know. What do you all think? Have you had similar thoughts or ideas thinking about this?
I mean, I am along the same line as you. Not necessarily like
While
challenging
we
conversation.
wait for people's processing, because it's early in the evening, like we're still warming up here. But I really resonate with what you said, Sam, because it's important to note that people do there are inconsistencies of values, and even the way that we look at interpret data is also different. People will see, um, for example, these increase in hate crimes against Asians as like that's those are inflated numbers, or that's just the narrative to divide us, and of all these other things, but this is reality, and we want to make sure that even though people don't experience the same things, that we don't immediately cut them off or invalidate what they're saying. I think what I find really helpful, uh, in terms of these kind of conversations, is just the ability to listen, and just reach across the aisle, even with those that disagree with you. Um, so yeah. Any case, I think I think I'm having some lagging issues over here. So if I'm skipping all around, then that's probably why. And while I'm trying to figure out my internet here, I do want to ask another question, um, that might be a little bit thought provoking. And
Hold on,
that
John. Before you ask, I know Esther was saying something. I wanted to hear what she had to say. Do you mind if
oh
we
Mhm.
go back to her? Yeah.
oh
Oh yeah,
yeah, Esther, go ahead.
I kind of lost my train of thought as well. So, but you had said something, Sam, that could
I'm
you
not
can you
quite
remind me, like
sure
very
why
selective
I can't
memory
hear
I have.
her. Is there everybody else hearing
Um,
her?
can you
Yes.
hear us?
Okay,
Yeah.
then it's just me.
Go for it, Esther.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
go for it, Esther.
But I was agreeing with Sam how just trying to prepare for this panel again. I was just thinking, why are we still in this stage where we're constantly having to have? I mean, it's great that we're having these conversations, but it's like, why aren't some people just getting it? Like, why is there such a disconnect, and why is there, why is it such a struggle? And I feel like this is gonna be a continual struggle, but just sometimes when you're just so desperate and just at a place where you're just so hopeless, you're like, why can't people just get it together? So that's kind of also the frustration I've been having this past, I guess, month, and then the past year, just overall and in general as well. So yeah.
Hmm.
You catch all that, John? I guess month, and then the past year, just overall.
All right. Well, I was told that you were done talking, so I don't know why I can't hear you on my end, Esther.
This
Oh
is
So,
no.
becoming a
so
struggle.
I'm over here just like, I think I'm just gonna nod, just because I'm just gonna assume that you're talking.
We'll just
Um,
keep you in.
so anyway, I'm gonna pass on the hosting duties to someone else so I can jump off here. But now I kind of, going alongside, I kind of want to, transition to our next question, which I think kind of brings us a little bit closer to, you know, at least coming to some sort of solution or process of getting there. And as Christians, I think it's an important question that I'm pretty sure we've all wrestled with personally. Um, and I know a lot of people that are watching this in your own way wrestle with this question too. Is what's our role as Christians when it comes to issues of racism, not just against our communities, but racism period. Like, what do we do with that in our circles? I don't want to call anybody out, but if anybody wants to just jump in on this question, go ahead. Sam, I'm gonna have you go first.
Me, Sam, or other Sam?
You know what? Here's what's gonna help us. We're Samantha and Sam. So when I say
Okay.
Sam, I'm gonna talk to you. Sam.
Okay.
If it makes you feel any better, I get messed up too because I'm used to be calling Sam. But
All right, ground
Okay.
rules. Samantha and Sam.
All
You're
right.
Sam every other day, Samantha, but tonight you're Samantha.
okay.
I think as Christians, I know this is going to sound cliche, but I think of following the example of Jesus in the sense of how he lived his life on earth. So when I read the Gospels, I read about a God who was very approachable, right? People wanted to be around him. The underprivileged wanted to be around him. The outcasts of society wanted to be around him. There was just something about him that was warm and inviting and made people feel safe. I mean, if you have someone that's been struggling with the sickness for decades, try to fight through a crowd just to touch his garment, that tells you a lot about the kind of person Jesus was in his society. I think as Christians, I think we could benefit from modeling um, a similar um, a similar kind of mindset, if you will, right? One thing I try to think about on my own, and I'm grateful that Tatara helps me out a lot, is what can I do to be more warm and inviting so that people feel safe around me or that people feel like they can approach me, right? If we're talking about making this country a safe place for the oppressed, what can I do as an individual to create a safe place around me so that people have that sense of security? So
Mm,
I think that's something that we could all benefit from, just constantly evaluating and reevaluating. Are the things we're saying, either in private when no one's hearing us or in public when people can hear us, consistent with each other and with our core values and with the Bible? If you're religious, how do we carry ourselves when we're talking to other people or when we're under high pressure situations? I think those are all thought provoking questions that we can meditate on. I think the other thing I can think of when it comes to following Jesus's example is, even though crowds came flocking to Jesus, Jesus never stood still or sat in one place. He was always traveling across the country of his day, if you will, interacting with multiple cultures and multiple languages and peoples. He didn't confine himself to like a 3 mile radius. He was all over the place, and the Bible accounts for that. So I think, um, aside from making ourselves inviting to other people, I think there's some measure of intentionality of going out there, making yourself a little bit uncomfortable. And if you put the God's context in your head, you're not really approaching a stranger, you're approaching a brother or sister in the family of God, right? So it's not enough to just sit down and make the space around us warm and inviting. We also need to be intentional about getting out there. So those are the two takeaways I think of from what Christians can do to reach out and combat racism.
Awesome. What do you think, Samantha?
Oh, that's my cue. I like what Sam was saying of having Jesus as an example. Kind of playing off what you said, Sam. Jesus was warm and inviting and loving, but also he was a spitfire when he needed to be. He called things out when he knew that they were wrong, and of course he did it in a loving way. So one of the takeaways that I think as Christians and as a church that we can do is when we see something wrong, when we see something as an injustice, when we see things that don't align with what we believe in or what Jesus would have done when he was here, I think we just have to call it out in a loving way. Let people know that, hey, that's wrong, that's not correct. And I think of the verse in Micah, I think it's Micah 6, verse 8. Let me pull it up. Yeah. And it says here, he has shown you, oh man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So I think that's
mm,
just a call to action for us too. That when we see something wrong, it's bad if we don't say anything at all. It's bad if we just sit on the sidelines. I think we call it as it is, but then take steps to mitigate it and try to, alleviate and solve the situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um,
Yeah, I just
what
wanted
doesn't?
to. Oh,
Go ahead.
okay.
No, go ahead, Jay.
I just wanted to, bounce off what Samantha and Sam said. I think they had, great foundation. This idea of, what did Jesus do? Christians are, the word Christian is follower of Jesus. So as a follower of Jesus, our model should be Jesus and what he did and how he lived and how he treated people. Racism was an issue when Jesus was alive, right? Even within the midst of his own followers, he had to deal with racism, and a lot of the things that he was doing with his disciples were combating this idea of racism and trying to get them to get over their preconceived notions of the other, the preconceived notion of the Gentiles, the preconceived notions of Samaritans, all those things. But I think something that's also really important is as Christians we need to create space to listen to each other. I think this discipline of listening is starting to become a lost discipline in our culture, right? In our society. It's all about, who's shouting the loudest, right? I'm going to shout over you, and who can out argue the other person, right? Who can do that? I think we need to make space to listen, make space to listen. And just to bounce off what Sam said, that's going to be uncomfortable. Okay. That is going to be uncomfortable. We need to learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable if we're going to do something about this, and take space to listen, not only for someone to listen to me and my story, but to listen to other people, and to listen to their stories, because everyone has their different story. Everyone has a different story, and making space to just listen, I think is huge, um, and showing love to each other. Um, that's how Jesus changed the world. Is he started with 12. He showed them his countercultural way of living, and then those 12 reached others, who reached others, who reached others. That's how the world was transformed in the first century. It was one reaching one loving someone in a selfless way, one treating someone how Christ would treat them. And unfortunately, and maybe sad, that type of love is so rare today. Really, that type of love is so rare today. But I think that's how we as Christians combat racism, above what everyone else said about speaking up when we feel something is wrong, standing up for justice, things like that, and speaking in a loving way. But also how we treat others. Um, I think it's so important because you change someone by loving them. You don't change them by telling them how they're wrong. You don't change them by telling them how much you're right. You change them by loving them unconditionally. You change them by showing them love. That's how something is going to change.
Yes, I ditto to everything that everyone has said, but also, um, like repeating, just looking to Jesus as our ultimate model. Um, I think he not only, just went against the norm, but he also showed what it meant to support and what support looked like that wasn't transactional. And what I mean by that is sometimes now where, there's Black Lives Matter or Stop Asian Hate, and just different groups that are out there. And it's just like, oh, if you support me, I'm going to support you. But then, like, if we look to Jesus and his character and how he lived out his life on earth, it's like he loved regardless. And no matter who you were, what class you were from, I mean, he loved you and he never expected anything back. And I think that's the ultimate test. It's just to show up and support, especially those who are oppressed. But with that said, I mean, if we see another group, our group of people, our community, other groups of people that are being oppressed, then yes, we need to definitely, regardless of whether you're a Christian or not, but especially if you're a Christian, definitely stand up for the one who's being hurt. But having said that, I actually had a follow-up question that I posed to some of my other friends, but I asked, should we, generally speaking, as people of color, be the ones to try to initiate these discussions, panels, conversations in the church, or should we wait for leadership? That's very, very loosely put, but leadership to initiate. And clearly, like, we are on this panel, we have created this panel, but just generally speaking, not just about like the Asian hate, but when last year when the Black Lives Matter movement was like really prominent, and I felt like we just, if we waited for a long time and certain voices didn't speak up ahead of time, then we would probably never had these conversations. So should we as people of color be the first ones to initiate these conversations? Question mark.
That's tough.
That's a good
tough.
question. That's a good question.
Yeah. I wish I heard that question.
John, she was Esther was oh man. Esther was saying that her question basically was, as people of color, should we be the ones who initiate conversations about race and equality and things like that, or should we wait for leadership to do so? Is that fair, Esther? Does that
Yeah,
kind
like
of
specifically, I guess, in the church or mainstream media, whatnot. But
okay?
yeah.
Yeah. So she's talking specifically in the church or mainstream media. Should it be the voices of people of color who speak up first, or should we wait for leadership to do
I
so?
think that's a great question to which I wish I heard. And I'm going to blame the devil tonight for the inconsistencies in the internet. I think it's a great question. We're probably going to touch on that later on. But I will say this. I think that, especially as Christians, regardless of where we come from, we have to start from the gospel. And oftentimes we like to talk and break down the gospel as like, where Jesus saved us from our sin, right? And oftentimes when we limit sin to just acts, we kind of
Mm-hmm.
also don't recognize that sin in of itself is in us and is a power in
Mm-hmm.
of its own. And it's like we all, especially when it comes to racism, we usually like to focus on the overt racism, the slurs and all those other things, which yeah, that's racism, but it starts from the heart. It starts from our our need to see ourselves as superior than others,
Mm-hmm.
and that is something that everybody wrestles with, right? And we all have to recognize that every single culture is fallen. Every single culture is sinful. And when we start setting up cultural systems, societal systems as the standard of which we live, then you're always going to have those inequalities in the system. When we can take a step back and recognize, you know what, as American or as a Filipino or whatever background, my culture is flawed. My culture is not the standard. And so, can we all start off at the same place and recognize, you know what, there's some good things about my culture, and there's other things about my culture that are not good. You know, when we look at history, not in the biblical history, and even in the historical books, humanity has done terrible things to one another, right? And so we have to start
Mm-hmm.
from a place of recognition of our brokenness as people. Even as Christians, we'd love to say that we've made it, but we're in the process of God, of what we call sanctification, where God is trying to get the sinful things out of us, and we have to let Him do so. And that's
Mm-hmm.
going to require time and faith. And as much as we want to push people to become anti-racist, now we have to recognize that everyone's on their journey. Um, we have to recognize that it is a process, and we have to pray. We have to hold true and fast to God to um, help us along in that journey. Um, Having said that, that doesn't mean that we have to step back and just passively wait for that to happen. There's
Mm.
also some intentionality on our part that we can do as well. When you look at what Paul said to the Philippians, he said this, and it's in Philippians 4, 8, where he said, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." In other words, if especially if you look at the context of this chapter, it's two women that are arguing with each other. So
Mm.
take those principles and apply it to our situation when two individuals, two cultures don't agree with each other.
Mm.
Think of the other person in a better light. And if we
Mm-hmm.
start from a place of criticism as opposed to compassion, we've already lost as Christians. If your immediate reaction to somebody saying that they've experienced racism is, "You don't know what racism is," or "Stop being a snowflake," what you're doing is you're responding exactly the way that the devil would respond, which is with criticism. It's like, "You don't know what it is," or "You have no idea what you're talking about." And you immediately dismiss their experience because it doesn't align with your view. And if we all recognize that all of our viewpoints are skewed, and maybe, just maybe, if you think of the other person better, that they may have something that they actually can share, that their story that they're trying, that nobody really, I mean, I'm not going to say this is, I would say generally speaking, no one cries racism just to cry racism. When we have those conversations, it's because it comes from a place of hurt. So as Christians, we have to have a better mindset when we approach these kind of conversations. And to what was shared earlier, as Jesus, we come from a position of service, like the woman at the well. Jesus didn't come in and say, "Hey, you're a sinner, get right." No, he actually came from a place of a servant. "Hey, give me some water, help me." So when we approach, especially as Christians, come from the position of "help me understand, teach me, share with me your story, share with me resources so I can better understand you and your experience so that I can better love you." That is the Christian ethos. That, in my opinion, that's how we should approach racism. Of course, racism is always going to exist as long as sin exists. But just because that's the case, that does not mean, or that does not mean that we dismiss it and say, "You know what? It's always going to be here, so why even bother? Let's wait till Jesus comes." No, we are active participants in sharing his love, and part of that is navigating these very difficult discussions. And don't come from a place of superiority, but come from a place of humility. And so I would say that would be how we as Christians respond.
Man, John, just listening to you, I think what you were saying. There's one point that I want to touch on, and that is the importance of coming from a place of humility, and the mindset that we are broken. I'm broken. You're broken. We're all sinful, and coming from this place from a place of humility, because a lot of times, whether we acknowledge it, know it or not, we like we come from places of superiority, right? It's about the pecking order. It's about, I'm above you, and I'm going to show it by how I treat you, or what I say, or how we talk, or how I demean you, or how I make you less than or whatever. And a lot of times as Christians, especially those who grew up in the church, we have a hard time with this coming from a place of humility because we think that we know everything. My specific faith tradition is Adventism, and this is a hole that sometimes we find ourselves in a lot. Is we think we know everything. We don't. We don't. And it's just so important to come from a place of humility when we're having these conversations, a place of, okay, help me to learn.
Yeah.
Help me to learn. It's just so powerful. And if someone comes to you with that attitude, that's very disarming. That is very disarming,
Yeah.
to someone who's listening to that. Or if you go to someone and say, "Please help me to learn. I want to listen to you. Help me learn about X, Y, and Z." That is very disarming to them, and it builds bridges. It builds relational bridges. It is so easy to think about the other when the other is far away from you. But when you come relationally close to the other, it's hard to think of them as the other
Yeah.
and not as a friend. Just relational proximity. It's even harder to think about. Oh, they're just the other. And that's why division is so and so horrible, and that's why I think the enemy uses division a lot, is because division separates people. It pulls people apart, and in order to fix anything, you need to be relationally close together and be willing to talk. And division doesn't allow you to have that. And as Christians in a society where I feel that division is so prevalent, you're Democrat or you're Republican, you're this or you're that, you're Black Lives Matter or you're Blue Lives Matter, you're pro cop or you're anti cop. In a world where we see so many divisions and divisive things, as Christians we should show a different path. I'm not saying to be passive. I'm not saying to let go or to pass by things that should not be passed by, or to not call out things that are wrong. But Christians should show a different path in saying, okay, let's show you the path of Jesus. This is how we heal, by coming close relationally, by willing to sit together and to talk and to come together, all of us coming with the spirit of humility, wanting to learn from the other person, like Paul saying, esteem the other above yourself. I think will go a long way in dealing with these issues.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome. That kind of leads into our next question. We've been talking about what we can do individually as Christians to combat racism. But I'm curious from the panel, and I'm looking at you, John, and you, Jeremy, more specifically, because you're religious leaders. What can we as Christians and as a church be part of the process to heal from hate? So we've talked about things we can do internally, but how can we set up the church or religious communities to be a leader to the world, to point people upwards to what the kingdom of heaven will be like?
I have a lot to say. So, Jeremy, you want to go first, or you want me to try to tackle
No,
this?
no, go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
Okay. So here's the thing. As individuals, we can do a lot, but collectively, we can do more. Right? More is better. Um, and the challenge that it comes, especially in church leadership, um, is that not everyone agrees, right? And you
Mm,
want to do your best to make sure that you keep the church united. So that's why there's challenges, and this is kind of going back to your question earlier, Esther, as to why um, people get fed up with church leadership because they don't act when we want them to act, right? Um, and I certainly share that frustration because far too often we don't speak up when we should. We don't act when we should. Um, And one of the things that I've encountered, especially as a church leader, I'm going to be frank and honest. I'll be 100% with you guys. Is that a lot of people don't see racism as an issue. I mean, they when overt racism, sure, everybody decries racism, but we like to think that we're already in the New Jerusalem where everyone's not racist, or they'll say cliches like it's sin, not skin, or Jesus is coming soon and we shouldn't get involved in these things. But those are harmful because they are neglectful. And just because we don't talk about it or speak about it doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist. And so I would say that awareness is key. And I actually have found some scriptural remedies that can help us as leaders navigate these issues. And the first thing that I would suggest for our church leaders is found in actually Acts 6, where we see an instance where there was a conflict between Jewish widows and Greek widows. Okay, very clear that there was a racial issue in the early church. And the apostles, when they were confronted by this, they were like, well, we are called to preach and to pray. And that's kind of where a lot of leaders are. Is like, I don't want to sully myself. I don't sully might be too strong of a word, but I don't want to get involved in this because it's going to keep us from preaching and praying. There's no conflict between the two. But if they're called to preach and pray, then they should follow their calling. But as church leaders, they didn't neglect it. What they did was they appointed certain leaders, a panel of non-Jews, of Greeks, of converts, of people that were full of the Holy Spirit, that were able to navigate these challenges, that were specifically called to do so, and empowered them to lead out in that challenge. And so in a way, I'm actually calling on the leaders to do the same thing. I mean, we can have special panels about evangelism. We can have special panels about the health message. But what's good? What good is food when you have communities that are not united, that are against each other? Why not appoint a special panel, or what the disciples did in Acts chapter 6? Have people that are well versed and educated to tackle these issues. And we see here, by doing that, they actually solved that issue in Jerusalem. And we also have to recognize that just because we've accepted the gospel, just because we were Christian, and just because we're part of the Advent movement, for those of us that are part of this church, we're not in heaven yet. And if you go several chapters later, Peter has a vision of the unclean animals, where he's like, I don't eat that stuff. I've never eaten that. And God had to tell him 3 times that I'm not talking about food. I'm talking about people. Peter, even though you've been called, Peter, even though you've preached, even though you've baptized a lot of people, you still are not associating with Gentiles. So I'm sending you to Titus. And even after Jesus spoke to Peter and Peter went to Titus, his attitude was like, the only reason why I'm doing this is because God told me to. His attitude was not right. He still saw the Gentiles as the other. He still saw it as an obligation rather than something that he should be doing, with love and compassion. But we do find several chapters later, the Council of Jerusalem, where the entire church was in uproar about these foreigners coming into the church. Like, how do we deal with this? Do you know who was the first person to actually speak up for the acceptance of Gentile Christians? Peter. And the reason being is because not too long before this council, Peter was challenged by Paul. And I bring that up because so often, especially as leaders, we may think of ourselves above being called out, and we should be humble enough to recognize, just like Peter, that we can be wrong. And as leaders, Jeremy, you and I, as leaders, as pastors, our conference officials, we should have the moral courage to call each other out, to confront each other in the face, even when we are not practicing life consistently with the principles that we are teaching. So my answer to that in a nutshell, Sam, is we can create structures within our church leadership to address the issues of inequality and racism in our church, and we should have the courage to confront and call out, not necessarily on social media, but do it the biblical way in person. If we're not consistently doing what we're supposed to be teaching, we should confront and we should address. And if necessary, at our next GC session, let's talk about it. Let's have an entire council about it. How are we doing? What is the state of racial reconciliation in the church? Because the last time I checked, the GC statistics showed that nearly half of the members of the entire world church has experienced racism in our church. So unless I'm blind, which I hope I can read numbers, we still have a long way to go, and we don't have any more time to waste. If we don't address this now, we are going to lose another generation. So I'm gonna pause there because I see myself getting a little bit passionate here. So Jeremy, take it away, man. Just go.
Man, John, I love listening to you, bro. I share your passion and and that's the thing. I appreciate you saying willingness to call each other out and willingness to call for change. Because so many times, we just want to keep the status quo, right? We don't want to rock the boat,
Yep.
we don't want
Yep.
to rock the boat. And selfishly speaking, sometimes we think, this is going to affect my career down the road. I have a career trajectory. This is going to affect if I make noise and yada yada yada. And in fact, there was someone who told me, they private messaged me on Facebook. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is right or wrong or they're right or wrong, but they private messaged me on Facebook and basically said, you know, as a pastor, when you speak out against this stuff, sometimes the brethren are not too happy. And in order to advance in your
Yeah.
career, maybe you should not say what you're saying, or maybe you should be careful about saying what you're saying. Um, or pick your battles or something like that. And like I said, I don't want to get into the rightness or wrongness of it. I'm just telling that story to prove a point that sometimes we just want the status quo. Um, but I'm calling myself out as a leader because I like the status quo too. I like being comfortable. Okay. I like being comfortable. And this makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't know if you guys do the Enneagram, but I am an Enneagram 9. For those who do not know what that is the peacemaker through and through. That's me, okay? So this makes me feel uncomfortable. But I have to wrestle with the fact that if I choose over over uncomfortability, or comfort over being uncomfortable, and choosing rather to not rock the boat, then I run the risk of losing another generation.
Mm-hmm.
Our generation is very, we're not very well visible in our church, right? Our generation is we're leaving the church. And Gen Z statistics are not even, it's even worse. I heard one statistic say that Gen Z, only 4% of Gen Z have a biblical worldview. Okay. So,
I see.
so if I'm not willing to speak out and say, okay, let's do this, then I run the risk of losing the next generation. I run the risk of the cycle happening again. And in 20 years, we're having the same conversation. Um, so in essence, I'm calling myself out. I'm calling myself out, uh, and saying that, John, I agree with you. As a church, and though, John, you and I, as pastors, maybe we don't have influence at the general conference, but we sure as heck have the influence. Sorry. Well,
No,
yeah,
dude, come on now. Just be real. Let's just go. Let's go. You're good, bro.
we sure as hell have influence in our conferences. Okay. we have the ears of our conference presidents. We have the ears of our ministerial directors. Let's start to say, hey, we need to have this. We need to create space
Yeah.
where we can have these conversations. We need to create space where reconciliation can happen. We need to
Yes.
create space where people are heard and listened to. Because if they're not heard or listened to, it doesn't matter what we people want to be heard and listened to.
Yes.
They want to be heard and listened to.
Yeah.
They want to be able to vent their frustration. There's a time for lamenting. That's what we did last panel. There's a place and a time for that. And we need to give space and time for people to do that. But we also need to give space and time to say, okay, as a church, how are we going to move forward? And that only happens in conversations, organically in conversations. And our church needs to appoint people who are willing to do this.
Yeah.
And I love your practical application, John, of our church creating a panel, creating a subcommittee, creating something where, hey, we as a conference or as a church, speaking about a local church, even in a local church, this can happen. As a local church, we see the need of this, and we're going to create space and time for this.
Yeah.
Um, I think it is a great start that I do not see. I see things about, like you said, evangelism. I see things about other things. And don't get me wrong, I think those are important. But so many times I feel that our young people think our church is irrelevant because we're talking and dealing with things that are not relevant in society.
Come
It's
on.
like we're talking about our own subculture. We're in our own subculture and we just talk to our own people. But our young people live in a different world. They don't live in the Adventist subculture all the time. All right. A lot of times they only live in that on Sabbath or if they go to a Christian or Adventist university or whatever. But a lot of times they don't. And so they want to deal, they want to talk, they want to wrestle with things that are in society, things that they're dealing with. Um, and yes. So, anyways, see, that's the problem with getting pastors on the panel, and a captive audience. We go into preacher mode.
Oh gosh.
And so I digress. My wife tells me, Jeremy, you talk too much. So I'm just gonna stop right there.
Yeah, I mean,
But
definitely we have a lot more to say, but I want to hear from the rest of you guys. Sam, Mantha, Sam, and Esther. Feel free to jump in. I mean, this is your church too. What do you
mhm.
want to see?
Can you hear me, John?
Yes. Yes, I can.
I'm
Finally.
like treading carefully at this point. No, I don't think you digressed at all, Jeremy. That was like you and John both like hit it like straight on. And that's really the struggle that I have been feeling. And you talk about like the Gen Zers, like I'm talking about like my generation might leave the church too, because growing up we've just had certain topics and certain things that took priority, like as a church of their mission focus. But for me, I guess the biggest struggle from the last panel and just like what's been happening over the past year is where does my faith come in? And I think the biggest struggle is that I found more of a church like more of a community of like-minded people, and I say secular very loosely, but more so on the secular platforms than I did in our spiritual platforms.
That's a shame.
So that, and exactly, and I feel like there's always a conflict. Where does my faith come in, and then where can I be relevant in the world? And and then I think it's so important to have, and I'm still trying to figure this out. This is going to be a long journey, but I think it's really important to have a safe space in church for people like me who are struggling and just questioning a faith. I think we need a safe space to even come out and say, I'm struggling with my faith. Because sometimes we're scared to even admit that, thinking, oh, what are people going to judge me for? Like, oh, I'm not Christian enough anymore, or I've lose sight of the light. And honestly, it's been hard. just even having conversations with people in my church sometimes, just not knowing how they're going to respond, saying, you know. And so I love all the practical applications, but I just feel like that's the biggest thing out there where, yes, there is a huge reason why so many people are leaving the church is because we just have, there's just, they make it as if it's a conflict and that they can't coincide with each other. Like the church, I feel like, I think in our last panel, Pastor Yang said that it should be a place where even like broken people, just imperfect people come together to just have conversations and just to lay everything down. And when we talk about like humbling ourselves when we try to have these conversations, and I know a lot of people out there may not be Adventists, but one of my favorite Adventist books I like to go to is Thoughts from the Mount of Blessings. And there's this one quote that always sticks out to me that I always highlight every time I read it. And it's in the beginning, it's like page 15. And there's just a little sentence where it says that our highest place is at the feet of our Savior. And I feel like the foot of the cross should just be the equalizer and whatever subject we broach. So
Yeah. Powerful.
Esther, thank you for your authenticity and your vulnerability. And yeah, my heart just breaks when I hear you say, and I've heard this before, but right when you said, I just feel that there's more of a community outside of my spiritual home. Because it should not be. It should not be. That shouldn't be. And it is frustrating as a leader, because I know that in order to have the authentic community that Jesus wants us to have, we need to have space where we can safely say, hey, I'm struggling with my faith. And someone doesn't automatically say or judge you saying that, oh, what's wrong? Are you not a Christian anymore? Here, let me give you this book so you can read it, so you can get back on the path or whatever. To have space
biggest turnout.
where we can be honest and vulnerable, where we can say, hey, I'm struggling, and it's okay to say that.
Get it together, John.
I'm struggling over here, Jerry. I'm sorry. Like, I shouldn't be laughing. I'm laughing because it's sad. Like, I've heard that many times, and sorry. Just continue.
We're laughing because, John, it's true. We've heard it so many times. We've heard it so many times that it's comical. That it shouldn't be said. It shouldn't be said, but unfortunately, it is. And I think as people of faith, and not only as people of faith, but as leaders in the church, I think we need to make it a point to be willing to create that safe space wherever we go. Andy Stanley always said, let your complaint be your ministry. Let your complaint be your ministry. If you're complaining about something, that is your ministry.
Wow.
Because no one is going to be more passionate about it than you, because you have such strong feelings about it. So as a people of faith, and as leaders in the church, practically speaking, at least for now, small step is to say, okay, I'm willing to be that safe space. Whether it's, saying, hey, I'm going to call, group my friends, and we're going to just be able to talk honestly about where we're at, or whatever that may look like. But, each of us individually to commit to saying, okay, I'm going to be that safe space, because it's not going to change just bemoaning it. it's going to change when the church, which is all of us, takes action, take action, and start creating what we're wanting to see in our church. And if we want to see a safe place where people can say they struggle, then I think we need to commit to saying, okay, I am wanting and willing to create that.
Yeah, kind of jumping off of what Jeremy said, I think the best way to lead and to start these things is to lead by example. So actually, one of the cool things at my church, one of the young people started this. I guess you would call it like an AY, like a after Sabbath like get together with a group of young people, and it's not even just young people from our church. We extend the invitation to everybody, really, whoever wants to come on over, and we have these pre-planned discussion questions. And these discussion questions, I think it's so cool because the topics that we pick are things that may not be talked about in the church. So one of the things was about, or in the future, I think next month we're talking about mental health. Again, just having, like what Jeremy said and what's been said earlier, just having those safe spaces and letting people know that you're there, you're a warm person, you're a welcoming person, and you're not there to judge anybody if anybody feels that they're doubting in their faith or that they're doubting in the church. And another thing too that was said earlier is people of, I guess, my generation. Am I Gen Z? Millennial? I don't know who I am.
Like in the middle.
What year,
Or like
what year were you
in
born in, Sam?
95.
Oh, you're right on the border.
You're
Around the
there.
border.
You're in the
Yeah.
middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Middle-ish. Well, point being, people of my age, they do leave the church. They do leave the church. They leave the church because the church isn't staying relevant to the issues that are going on. So I'm also one of those people that don't like to rock the boat because I like being in my comfort zone. I don't like conflict. But at the same time, if we don't rock the boat, if we don't do what Jesus did, if we don't turn society upside down, then how can there really be any change in the future? So I think trying to talk about these taboo topics in like safe spaces, especially for young people too, is like one of the best ways to go forward, to move forward, and to help to mitigate these problems that we've been having.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
I'm just trying to think of the things going through my head, and it's like, well, what more can I add onto a pastor's plate that, you know?
You used to be a theology major, bro. So don't even try to front, bro.
Oh man.
Yeah, I was about to say you're in the same classes as John and I, so you
Hey,
know.
I think we'll save that background information for another discussion, man. I'm wearing a different hat tonight. As a non-religious leader, I would say it goes back to what you were saying, Jeremy, about creating a safe space and whatnot. I think one of the themes that came up in our last panel discussion was, you know, a lot of us have a lot of thoughts, but sometimes we don't vocalize it because we feel like no one will hear us or no one will listen, and that kind of just reinforces this feedback loop of, well, if no one's going to listen to me, I'm not going to say anything, and then before you know it, you never say anything at all, even if you are hurting, right? I think, it's not just limited to pastors, right? But if you are in a position where you can affect change in your local church, being intentional and going out there and just sitting down and listening to other people's stories, you know, of course, listening not to reply, but to understand, right? Giving people the chance to vocalize what they're feeling about something, and then, you know, based on what they're saying, I think the best thing that's helped me in the past is when I see that something I say to someone else leads to some sort of action. That encourages me into thinking that, oh, you know, somebody really did listen to me because there is some tangible output that I'm seeing here. And it could be as something simple as, you know, maybe the pastor preacher will reference a comment I made without name dropping me in a sermon that he or she preaches, right? I think instances like that make me feel good, like, oh, that person really was listening because that person remembered. So I
Mhm.
think more opportunities to reinforce the notion of, hey, it's okay to speak up, and if you do speak up, this is what I would like to do based on what I'm hearing. So I think oftentimes we miss that last mile of the process where we will
Mm,
listen, but we won't really do much about it. And it's very easy to sit down and listen. It's another thing to get up and do something about it.
Yeah.
mm.
Um, the other thing, what I just lost my thought. Come back to me. I'll think about it.
Okay. Gonna wrap up soon, but I do want to take a question from our live audience, and I think that it's actually a very good question, which might also be very revealing.
Yeah.
But I'll put it up here. I'll put it up here anyway. So, Cherlu asked us on Facebook, just curious, do church leaders go through communication training? Because some of the older and younger generation don't know how to communicate. She follows up by saying, so how are we supposed to create a safe space to share if leaders don't know how to communicate in a loving way? So, um, having gone through formal theological education, I can tell you that the kind of communication that we learn is essentially just preaching, right, Jeremy, Sam? But we don't have like classes like communication classes, right? We do have we I have gone through like speech classes and stuff like that, but nothing in terms of like what communication majors would go through. So we do take interpersonal ministry classes. We do take classes like that, but in terms of like formal communications, like someone who's a communications major would take, I think it would be helpful. But no, we don't have that formally. No, Jeremy, Sam.
No, ditto.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks
No.
for leaving me out there. Because
It's
Yeah, no
just you,
problem,
John.
John.
I'm kidding.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Um, no, ditto, ditto. And some of my pastoral buddies and I have talked about this. The desire that we wish that some of our theological training was more practical and less theological, if that makes sense, or theoretical.
yeah,
Things practically, how to deal with people, how to talk to people, how to communicate, how to do conflict resolution, all that stuff. So at least for me personally, the little bit I've learned was just by my own reading, research, and my own dumb mistakes.
yeah.
Um, so, but no, unfortunately, we don't. I wish we did, though. I
So
wish we
her
did.
so her follow up comment then is, so then should we start? The answer is
Absolutely.
yes, and thank you for
Yes,
calling us out. But
we should.
because okay, here's the thing, like just real talk. I mean, we're trained to communicate in a public setting, right?
Yeah,
From preaching, okay. But when it comes to actually speaking to someone in an interpersonal way, we have some, but we don't have a lot. And when you look at Jesus' ministry, did he preach? Yes. Did he teach? Yes. But we actually see him in a lot of conversations with his disciples, with the Pharisees, with Sadducees, with publicans, with tax collectors, with women, with all kinds of people. And so I agree, we need to bring it a little bit closer to home and be able to have conversations. So yeah, I'm with you, and I hope that we can create that kind of change. So thank you for that
yeah,
question.
yeah. All we
Um,
gotta do is just wait for John to get his doctorate
Look, man,
and start
listen.
teaching at a university, and we'll set.
Okay,
Sam too, get your
I'm
doctorate.
just curious. I'm just curious, John, Jeremy, are there like local church networks that are multi-denominational where you can kind of get that training ad hoc? Like maybe it's not in an academic setting, but I've
yes,
heard of like counseling networks and stuff like that. Is
yes.
there something? Okay.
Yes,
Well, I mean
yes.
I would say because I'm doing that myself. I'm getting educated in counseling, but in terms of like communication, like interpersonal, that's interdisciplinary, because your typical communication degree is geared more towards like going into broadcasting or whatnot. But in terms of,
Mhm.
well, I think what we're talking about is interpersonal communication. One, we could like take that in interdisciplinary studies, but it also comes with experience. You have to talk to people, right? You have to
Right.
learn how to talk to people. I mean, I don't know if there's any good classroom that can facilitate that other than, hey, sit down and try to listen and buy books, which is going to kind of lead us to our last discussion question for this evening. I know we're running up a little bit. I just I like hanging out with you guys, but our last I guess our last question for this evening is, that's not the question. This is the question. Is what resources would we recommend to help others that are interested in learning more? What do you guys think? Like, what are some resources that you've been kind of using yourself that has helped you and journeying through what we've been discussing?
I can go first with this question, but I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of the previous discussion about communication. Um, for me personally, I feel like sometimes we overcomplicate the method of communicating. And what I mean by that is if we look at Jesus and his ministry is there were so many different forms of communication he practiced. And obviously the oratory where he preached was absolutely amazing, but I feel like he never preached to people until he knew that he had met their physical needs first. In that sense, you always see him, if you're hungry, he's not going to go up to you and start preaching until he knows, like, if you're hungry, you need to be fed. If you're hurting, if you're sick, he always healed people first. And through that, I mean, that's just a huge step taken to begin with. And obviously, like, pastors are trained to preach. And I think that's where other people in the congregation can come in with different talents and different strengths. And as a body, we can, communicate effectively in different ways. And so I feel like sometimes as a church, we just kind of overcomplicate, communicating what we, call communicating. And it's just sometimes I feel like, okay, let's lay aside the sermon or let's lay aside whatever we're trying to preach. And let's just, from just like ground zero, if you're hurting, let's try to figure out a way to keep you from hurting, get you better. Or if you're hungry, let's find a way to, get you in a sustainable way of living, and stuff like that. So I just wanted to piggyback off that. With that, other resources that I've been really enjoying lately is some podcasts. One is called sorry, I'm getting distracted. One is called Reclaim Podcast, and it's from the Asian American Christian Collaborative. And it's an organization that was created in the peak of COVID, where we're just getting just a surge of anti-Asian hate crimes. And this organization came together, and now they have a podcast where they talk about different social, racial injustices and tying it back to different Asian backgrounds, and lots of speakers are of Asian descent, and so just very prominent authors, speakers within this realm, and from a Christian perspective as well. So that's been really helpful. And the other one is called The New Activists, and it's a podcast produced by International Justice Mission, and they've also interviewed really prominent and like international and even local organizations and leaders that are really trying to make a difference in the work against injustice as well.
Yeah, I actually agree with Esther. She actually recommended those podcasts to me, and I am listening to one of those. Guys, feel free to leave those, put the resources in the comment for people that are following us right now. So go ahead and any books and resources that you suggest, go ahead and put them in the chat. So, Jeremy, since you took literally like yourself to get those resources? You want to share with us? Don't keep us in suspense, man. Let us know.
um, yeah. So the book that I was looking for, I'm sorry, it's not in the library here. So I must have it at the church. So I totally forgot the name of it. But I did have another book, and that is this one right here. The Lead Anti-Racism Challenge, a devotional journey. So this is more of a devotional book. It's written by different pastors and faith leaders, and it's been really good. In fact, I have a website as well. It's called leadpledge.org. So I would highly recommend that book if you're looking for devotional material on how to practically respond to racism. What does it mean? How do you deal with it spiritually? Um, all that good stuff.
Awesome. Samantha, you have any
Well,
resources you want to share with us?
as a matter of fact, I do. I don't know if you can see it. I think that the bottom line with what we were talking about earlier is just basic communication, basic like making friends, basic human rights. And this book is pretty famous. How to win friends and influence people.
Ah,
I picked it up, I guess, a couple months ago. But again, it's just the foundation of how to treat people with respect, learn their name, learn who they are, and later on, I mean, you first establish that relationship of building that friendship, and then as the title says, you influence them later on, how like your own story, and then in turn they influence you with their story, just building up those communities to know that we're not alone, we're not in this battle alone, and there's other people out there that you can communicate with and build friendships with. So that's a pretty good book that I would say has stuck out to me lately. Okay.
Sam, I saw that you shared some resources in our chat. Wow, you want to highlight them for us?
Yeah, I know this has been mentioned a lot recently, but Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. It's talking about the fight for justice in the Deep South, specifically Alabama. Lots of stories in there that are very unsettling, very hard to stomach as you read through them. But this goes back to what we've been talking about, how we just need to confront, our own shortcomings, right? And face the music in some respects. So that's one book. I haven't read this book, but my wife has. It's called Caste: The Origins of Our Discontent. Just talks about the underpinnings of society and how things came to be where they are today. Um, from what my wife said, it's a pretty tough book to read. A lot of it just seems unbelievable, but the stories in there are true and well documented. So that would be another good eye-opening piece to look at.
Awesome. Um, all great resources. I have a lot of resources I can share with you, but two resources that I think would be very helpful for what we've been discussing, anti-Asian racism, and how to be more relevant as a church. The first resources that I would suggest to read is something that I'm still reading right now, which I think is dynamite when it comes to history of Asian American history in this country. So I encourage all of you here on this panel, those of you that are interested in the Asian American experience, pick up this book
mm,
called Two Faces of Exclusion: The Untold History of Anti-Asian Racism in the United States. And
mm,
it's by Lon Kurashige. Kurashige. Um, Two Faces of Exclusion: The Untold History of Anti-Asian Racism in the United States. And I will put that in the chat. And the second book I encourage you to read, it's called Good Faith: Being a Christian When Society Thinks You're Irrelevant and Extreme. And it is by David Kinnaman and Gabe Leons. An excellent book that pretty much speaks to what we've been wrestling with here about how to be relevant, not just to the next generation, but to all generations. Because I'm pretty sure all of us could pretty much resonate with being a Christian. when not only society thinks that you're irrelevant, but when we think the church is irrelevant. So I'll put that in the chat. Again, good faith, as well as two faces of exclusion, the untold story of anti-Asian racism in this country, which I hope will help you on your journey. So having said that, while I go ahead and put this in the chat box, last thoughts, closing thoughts before we end our time together. We'll start with Sam. Mantha.
Oh wow, that always throws me off, John. When you
I
add
know,
it
I'm
at the
throwing
end.
off myself.
Closing thoughts. I would say for our panelists and for our audience, utilize those resources that were put out for you. I know I will, especially with the podcast that Esther recommended, because it's something that you can listen to, or something that you can spend time in reading and just educating ourselves to further figure out how to navigate this this crazy world together.
All right. Sam. I think you're mute, buddy. Or am I just not hearing him? Is it me?
Man,
No, no,
I
I'm
don't
not
hear
Okay,
hearing
good.
him
I'm
you
over
either.
either.
here panicking. I'm just like, we were doing so well.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Am I there? Okay. Oh yeah. So I guess my closing thoughts are I just want to thank you all for the support, not just the other panelists, but those of you that are tuning in. Definitely realizing the importance of community, and as as humans and as Christians we have been made for community. So yes, this is a fight, this is a struggle, this is a battle. It can get low at times, it can get discouraging. It makes me want to throw in the towel, but then when I remember that there are other people out there that are experiencing similar things, and when I think about other people that are out there that are there to be supportive, it makes me want to keep going. So I just want to express a deep and heartfelt thanks to all of you.
Thanks, Sam. Esther?
Oh, I thought you were gonna call him Jeremy first. Dang it.
I mean, you
No,
want
it's
Jeremy?
okay. I can go. It's fine.
What I meant to say was Jeremy, but since you're
No,
already
I'm-
talking, Esther, you might as well go ahead.
Okay, whatever. So, I mean, repeating everything that the two have gone before me, I mean, this has been great. I mean, as nervous as I get before I do this, I honestly do enjoy having these conversations. And so I would love to continue to talk about different topics as well. But thank you so much to the panelists here and everyone who's tuned in and watched. The support that we've received has been comforting. And just knowing that there is hope for a better future. And then to end it on a lighter note, once COVID kind of dies down, I would love to get together and do a get together with food and share our love of white rice.
No hate to brown rice or purple rice or any other rice out there.
But let's just be real when it comes to food. White rice is the best.
We should all have a podcast just called Rice. Just
oh
throw that out there.
yes.
Oh my goodness. So I think we can just share our love of food together.
Amen.
I think that would be great.
Well,
Is it my turn? Is it
Yeah.
my turn?
Yes, now it's your turn, Jeremy.
Okay. All
Jeremy,
right.
not Esther. Right. I got to get the order correct next time.
All right. Closing thoughts, comments. Just wanted to thank all the panelists for engaging in conversation, being honest, being vulnerable. Thank you to John for his leadership and putting this all together. I really appreciate it. Thanks for those who are listening. And I just challenge all of us to continue keeping Jesus in the forefront, because that's who really matters. Continue keeping Jesus in the forefront. Continue being willing to listen, being willing to engage, and being willing to love like Jesus. That's the most important thing. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah. I just want to thank all of our panelists. I know that we're missing several of our original panelists, and we hope that you're watching, and we hope to have you back on. You guys want to do this again sometime? All right,
Hey,
cool.
I like Esther's idea. Let's get
Yeah,
together.
we're gonna get together. We're gonna vlog it. We're gonna post it and stuff like that. But
Hey, yeah,
um,
I mean, Esther already has the Instagram stuff going, so she
oh,
can just be,
Yeah.
yeah, she can just be putting stuff on her story. Yeah, yeah,
dude,
it'll
I'm
be
like
great.
hungry right now. I'm just like, yeah, I knew it was a mistake when we talked about food because I'm over here just like
Yeah.
I'm frustrated now because I don't have access to those things
Oh
here in
yeah.
Kentucky. No shade to Kentucky, just don't have access. But no, on the real though, I want to thank each and every one of you. You know, just the kind of the conversations we've had privately and the conversations we've had here has been really helpful in my own journey processing this. I mean, the last panel discussion was really real and raw, very healing, and just being able to have this space and talk and um, struggle through this because we don't have all the answers. We know that Jesus does, but while we're waiting, we're going to struggle, and it's definitely something we need to journey with together. We need to continue to have dialogue over. But here's the thing: I want to leave this passage in Scripture as a challenge, and it's found in Luke chapter 18. And the parable is of a woman that repeatedly kept going to a judge, even though the
Mm,
judge was not just. Repeatedly kept going to the judge, agitating, annoying, bothering this judge until he gave her a fair ruling. Why do I share that? Because when it comes to challenging things like racism, whether it's against the Asian American Pacific Islander, whether it's against black people, with whatever, it's going to require men and women who are willing to be persistent, willing to be pesky, willing to have the moral courage to continue
mm,
to keep at these kind of conversations, to keep trying to push for the kind of change that we not just want to see, that we need to see, that the world
mm,
needs to see. So I don't want us to say, okay, now that we talked about it, it's over. No, keep at it. This is a challenge not just for those of you here in this panel or those of you that are watching. This is a channel to myself. This is a challenge to myself. Keep pushing. And we need to push for this change because if not, nothing will happen. So, having said that, I want to wish you all a good night. Thank you for joining us here on, well, I guess Sam popped out. She was
Sam
ready
just
to go.
left.
mm. Sam was ready to go.
she was ready to go. So anyway, have a good night, everyone. God bless. And before we end, we need to pray. I was gonna ask Sam to pray, but she dropped off. But
She knew she was
she
gonna
she
say
knew I was
something.
going there.
She
So
knew you were going
yeah.
there.
Well, hey, Esther, would you like to say the prayer to close us this evening?
Sure.
Okay.
Sam's gonna get a talking to after this. No, okay. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this evening you have provided for us. Thank you so much for this platform, for these group of people, just for just the social media and technology, just be able to reach others through so many mediums. And I thank you so much for the courage of my friends to just talk about very relevant issues of our society, of today, and how we as a church and as Christians, as followers of Christ, can truly be your hands and feet, and that we can be the love that you want us to share with others, that we can ultimately share the good news and to point everyone back to you, and ultimately just reunite with you in the results, and just provide us the Holy Spirit, that nothing will be of our own ambitions, but it will be motivated by you. I thank you so much for everything and just for this time. In your name I pray. Amen.
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 All right. Goodbye, everyone. Happy AAPI Heritage Month, and we will maybe see you next time. God bless you. Have a good night.